Olivia Hayes stood at the entrance of the intelligence facility longer than she should have. The building wasn't impressive from the outside, just concrete walls, reinforced glass, and security checkpoints that moved people in and out like cargo. But inside, she could already hear it, the steady rhythm of a place that ran on urgency. Radios clicking, chairs scraping, phones ringing without patience. A soldier checked her ID, glanced at her assignment orders, then pointed without much interest down the corridor. Analyst section, second floor, end of hall. No welcome, no explanation, just direction. Olivia adjusted the strap of her bag and moved inside. The intelligence unit was louder than she expected. Not loud in volume, but in presence. Voices overlapping, bursts of frustration, quick laughter that didn't last long. Everyone seemed to know exactly where they were going and exactly what they were doing. That kind of confidence filled the room more than any decoration ever could. She noticed something else too. Nobody looked at her for long. A few glanced her way, briefly, like checking a box, and then returned to their screens. She was new, and in a place like this, new usually meant unimportant until proven otherwise. Her assignment label read, Senior Intelligence Analyst, Pattern Analysis Division. To her, that meant responsibility. To them, it apparently meant paperwork. Her workspace was at the edge of a shared room filled with large monitors showing maps, intercepted data streams, and shifting operational overlays. 3 desks down, 2 analysts were arguing over satellite timing discrepancies. Across the room, someone was tracking convoy movements in real time. Olivia sat down quietly, placed her notebook beside the keyboard, and began reviewing her assigned files. The first batch was routine. Intercepted radio fragments, logistics movement reports, reconnaissance summaries, partial drone surveillance notes, nothing connected cleanly. At least not on the surface. But Olivia didn't look for surface-level connections. She never did. She started with time. Time always told the truth when everything else was fragmented. By the end of her first hour, she noticed something small. A supply convoy reported delayed near a northern checkpoint, twice in 3 days. Not unusual on its own. But the delays weren't random. They were occurring at nearly identical time intervals, down to a 12 to 15-minute deviation window. She marked it. Then another report caught her attention. A radio silence period along a separate route, also repeating, but not matching the convoy delays exactly. It was offset, like pieces of a system that didn't want to line up too obviously. Olivia leaned closer to the screen. Her fingers paused above the keyboard. This wasn't noise. It was structure trying not to look like structure. First day going all right? The voice came from behind her. Olivia turned slightly. A man in his 40s stood there, coffee in hand, wearing the relaxed posture of someone who had spent too long in intelligence work to be impressed by anything new. Yeah, she replied, just reviewing the incoming logs. He glanced at her screen without really studying it. Careful with that stuff. You'll drown in patterns if you start seeing them everywhere. A half smile. Not unkind, just dismissive in a familiar way. I'll keep that in mind, Olivia said. He nodded once and walked away. She turned back to the screen, and kept seeing them anyway. By late afternoon, Olivia had built a rough map on her private notes. 3 separate regions, 3 recurring irregularities. Each one individually explained away in reports as weather delays, communication interference, or operational unpredictability. But together, they formed something tighter, something coordinated. She circled the cluster of data points, then added timestamps, then recalculated spacing between events. Her expression didn't change, but her focus sharpened. If she was right, this wasn't random disruption. It was preparation. A briefing was called just before evening rotation. Olivia followed the group into a medium-sized operations room. The atmosphere changed instantly. Less noise, more control. Senior officers stood around a central display table projecting layered intelligence feeds. She took a seat near the back. No one introduced her. That was fine. She didn't expect it. The briefing officer began speaking. Current assessment: minor enemy movement activity along northern logistics corridors. No confirmed escalation indicators. Likely probing behavior. Heads nodded around the room. Olivia looked at the projected map. She saw the same patterns she had been tracing all day, but simplified, flattened, explained away. A lieutenant spoke up. "We've seen similar activity before, probably just pressure testing supply response times." "Agreed," someone else added. The briefing continued. Olivia waited. She didn't interrupt immediately. That wasn't her approach. Not here. She listened until the room began to relax into certainty. Then she raised her hand slightly. Not dramatically. Just enough. The officer leading the briefing glanced at her. "Yes?" Olivia stood. "I think the current interpretation is incomplete." The room shifted in a subtle way. The kind of attention that isn't given freely, but reluctantly redirected. She continued. "The timing of the disruptions across all three sectors is consistent within a narrow pattern window. It's not random probing. It's synchronized staging." A few expressions tightened. Someone near the front exhaled like they were already tired of the conversation. Olivia pointed to the projected map. "If you align the delays and communication gaps chronologically, they form a preparation cycle. Not contact pressure. Preparation." The briefing officer folded his arms. "What are you suggesting exactly?" She hesitated only briefly. "That an operational event is being coordinated, not localized activity. A multi-point execution designed to disrupt logistics and communications simultaneously." Silence followed. Not agreement, not disbelief either. Just pause. Then a senior analyst shook his head slightly. "That's a significant leap from correlation." Another added, "We'd need field confirmation before considering anything at that scale." Olivia didn't argue. She had expected that response. "I understand," she said calmly. "I'm only flagging the structure. It's consistent across all data sets we've received in the last 72 hours. The briefing officer closed the folder in front of him. "Noted. We'll continue monitoring." That meant the discussion was over. The room slowly returned to its default assumptions. Olivia sat back down. No one looked at her again. Later that night, most of the unit transitioned into quieter activity cycles. Some left. Others stayed for night monitoring shifts. The hum of the facility softened but never disappeared. Olivia remained at her station. She opened a fresh file and began layering everything again, this time without interruption. The patterns didn't change. If anything, they became clearer. She zoomed in on one cluster of timing data and noticed something that made her pause. A repetition interval that matched a known operational doctrine, one she had studied years ago during a training attachment report from a previous conflict zone. She checked it again, then again. It wasn't similar. It was consistent, deliberate. Her fingers stopped moving. For the first time that day, she felt the weight of what she might be looking at. If this pattern was correct, then what she was seeing wasn't just preparation. It was alignment. And alignment meant execution was already in motion, just not visible yet. Olivia saved her analysis under a private classification folder. She didn't submit it. Not yet. Instead, she marked 3 clusters of data on her map and wrote a single note beside them. Too structured to be incidental. She leaned back slightly in her chair, eyes fixed on the glowing screen. Around her, the unit continued its routine, confident, efficient, unconcerned. But Olivia didn't share that confidence. Not anymore. Because if she was right, the question wasn't whether something was coming. It was how much of it had already been set in motion without anyone noticing. The next morning, Olivia arrived earlier than most of the unit. The hallway lights were still in their slow morning cycle, slightly dimmed, as if the building itself hadn't fully committed to being awake yet. A few analysts were already at their stations, coffee in hand, staring at screens filled with overnight updates. Olivia sat down, reopened her files, and continued where she had left off. The patterns were still there. That was the problem. They should have collapsed under scrutiny. Most false correlations did. That's what made them false. But hers didn't fade. They tightened. She expanded the dataset, adding another 48 hours of intercepted communications and logistics logs. The structure became sharper, like something pressing itself into visibility. By mid-morning, she had identified a second layer. It wasn't just timing, it was spacing. Each disruption, radio silence, convoy delay, surveillance gap, was positioned in a way that avoided overlapping detection windows. Almost like whoever was behind it understood how intelligence units triangulated patterns. Olivia leaned back slightly, rubbing her fingers together. That detail mattered. It meant awareness. Not chaos, not opportunism. Awareness of how they were being watched. Still digging into that? The voice came from her left. A different analyst this time, mid-30s, headset around his neck, eyes still on his monitor. Olivia nodded. Yes. He glanced at her screen. You're still on those delays? Yes. He gave a short breath that wasn't quite a laugh. Everyone's seeing delays. It's terrain, comms interference, supply friction. Happens every cycle. Olivia didn't look away from her data. These aren't independent cycles. That made him pause, but only briefly. He tapped his pen against the desk. Just be careful not to build a story out of coincidence. Then he turned back to his screen. Olivia didn't respond. She had already learned something important about this environment. People didn't reject data here. They rejected urgency. Around noon, she was called into a secondary review meeting. This one was smaller than the briefing room. Just 5 analysts and a senior operations coordinator. The atmosphere was more relaxed, but that often made skepticism sharper, not softer. Olivia stood near the digital display as her findings were pulled up. I've mapped the irregularities across the last 72 hours, she began. She pointed to the first cluster. Here. Northern Logistics wrote, repeated delays within a controlled timing window. Then the second. Here, communication blackout intervals along eastern relay nodes, structured gaps, not random interference. Then the third. Here, reconnaissance blind spots occurring at consistent offsets. She let the data speak before continuing. Individually, they're explainable. Together, they form a coordinated preparation pattern. The room stayed quiet for a moment. Then the coordinator leaned forward slightly. What are you predicting exactly? Olivia hesitated. Not because she was unsure, but because she understood the weight of the question. I'm not predicting a single action, she said. I'm identifying a staging framework. If it continues, it will likely culminate in a synchronized disruption event, targeting logistics and communication systems simultaneously. One of the analysts shook his head slightly. That's a broad conclusion from limited signals. It's not limited, Olivia replied calmly. It's consistent across multiple independent channels. Another analyst crossed his arms. Even if you're right, we still need confirmation from field units. Otherwise, it's speculation. Olivia nodded once. I agree, but the pattern suggests we may not get confirmation before execution begins. That line hung in the air a little longer than the others, but it didn't change anything. The coordinator closed the file window. We'll log your assessment. Continue monitoring. Meeting over. Back at her desk, Olivia didn't move for a moment. Not because she was frustrated, because she was calculating. The resistance wasn't personal. It was procedural. Intelligence units didn't escalate based on pattern recognition alone. They needed proof that could be validated in the field. But her model wasn't waiting for validation. It was already tightening. She reopened her analysis and added a new layer. Radio frequency timing drift patterns across 3 separate regions. That's when she saw it. A repetition she had missed earlier. Not in the data itself, but in the spacing between data clusters. It matched something she had studied years ago during a joint intelligence exchange, a structured operational doctrine used to mask multi-phase coordination under natural environmental noise. Her eyes narrowed slightly. She pulled up archived doctrine references, scrolled, compared, then stopped. The match wasn't partial. It was near exact. Olivia stood up and walked to the wall display used for collaborative mapping. She overlaid her findings manually, aligning timestamps across all 3 regions. Behind her, the room continued operating normally. Phones ringing, chairs shifting, quiet conversations. No one paid attention. But on the map in front of her, something else was forming. A triangle of timing convergence points. Each point connected not by geography, but by sequence. She stepped closer. This wasn't 3 separate disruptions. It was one operation split into layers, designed to look unrelated until the final phase. Her hand rested lightly against the edge of the table. She exhaled slowly. "Not yet," she murmured to herself. Not because it wasn't happening, but because she still didn't have the final piece. That afternoon, she requested access to a restricted satellite feed layer tied to the northern corridor. Her request was routed through protocol, then flagged, then reviewed, then denied. The response came back without explanation beyond standard classification limits. Olivia stared at the notification for a long moment, then closed it. She didn't argue. She didn't resend the request. She simply adjusted her approach. If she couldn't access higher resolution confirmation, she would refine the prediction using what she already had. By evening, she had narrowed the potential target set down to 4 critical infrastructure nodes, 2 logistics hubs, 1 communications relay center, 1 transport junction, each one aligned within the same operational window. She wrote the final note for the day. If coordination continues at current interval, execution window likely within 48 to 72 hours. She stared at it for a moment before saving it. Not sending it, just saving it. Across the room, someone called out a casual update about routine surveillance activity returning to baseline in one sector. A few people relaxed slightly at the news. Olivia didn't, because her model didn't show de-escalation. It showed compression, and compression usually came right before release. She closed her laptop slowly. Her reflection faintly appeared on the dark screen. Tired eyes, steady expression. No visible panic, just focus. The noise around her stayed the same, but inside her analysis, something had shifted. It was no longer a question of whether the pattern was real. It was a question of how long the rest of the unit would continue treating it like it wasn't. The briefing room was more crowded than usual that morning. Olivia noticed that immediately. Extra chairs had been pulled in. 2 senior officers from outside her unit were present, their uniforms slightly different in insignia, their expressions more rigid. Something about the atmosphere felt heavier, not urgent yet, but leaning in that direction. She took her usual position near the side wall again. No one offered her a seat closer to the center. That part hadn't changed. The operations coordinator stood at the front, tablet in hand. "We're reviewing updated intelligence assessments from multiple sectors," he said. "There's been an increase in irregular activity across northern and eastern corridors." A few heads nodded. Standard acknowledgement. Olivia stayed still. She already knew what they were seeing. Or what they thought they were seeing. The display shifted to a wide operational map. Small markers showed disruptions, delays, brief communication drops, minor reconnaissance anomalies. To most people in the room, it looked like scattered friction across a large region. To Olivia, it looked like a countdown that had already started moving. She waited until the briefing reached its natural pause point. Then she stepped forward. Not abruptly, just enough to be seen. "I need to present a consolidated assessment," she said. A few eyes turned toward her, some neutral, some already skeptical. The coordinator nodded once. "Go ahead." Olivia connected her file to the display. The map restructured into layers. Timelines, not geography. I've aligned all reported irregularities across the last 4 days, she began. When you remove geographic separation and focus on sequence timing, the activity forms a structured progression. She highlighted the first phase. Phase 1. Controlled disruption of supply movement along secondary routes. Then the second. Phase 2. Communication instability introduced in staggered intervals across relay nodes. Then the third. Phase 3. Surveillance blind gaps aligned with logistics pressure points. The room grew quieter as she spoke. Not convinced yet, but listening more carefully now. Olivia continued. This is not isolated interference. It is coordinated staging. Each phase is designed to reduce response efficiency before simultaneous execution. A lieutenant near the front leaned forward slightly. Execution of what exactly? He asked. Olivia didn't hesitate. A synchronized multi-target operation, likely focused on logistics hubs and communication infrastructure, designed to overload response capacity in the first hour. A murmur moved through the room. The coordinator crossed his arms. What's your confidence level on that assessment? Olivia chose her words carefully. Moderate to high based on pattern consistency. Higher if we consider historical doctrine alignment from previous operational case files. That got attention. One of the senior officers raised a hand slightly. Doctrine alignment with what specifically? Olivia pulled up a reference overlay. A coordinated disruption model used in prior asymmetric engagements. The timing intervals match known staging behavior. The room shifted again, this time less skeptical, more cautious. But caution wasn't agreement. It rarely was. After a moment, the coordinator exhaled slowly. We acknowledge your analysis, he said, but we still lack direct confirmation of intent or capability. Olivia nodded. I understand. A pause, then she added, but we may not receive confirmation before execution begins. That line settled differently. Not dramatic, just uncomfortable. One of the senior analysts spoke up. You're asking us to treat correlation as operational certainty. I'm asking you to treat consistent multi-layer alignment as potential imminent action, Olivia replied. Silence followed. Then the coordinator closed the file on the display. We will increase monitoring frequency across flagged sectors. For now, no change in operational posture. The meeting was effectively over. Back in the main operations floor, life resumed its usual rhythm. The tension from the briefing didn't fully dissolve, but it was absorbed into routine. Analysts returned to screens. Radios continued their steady background chatter. Someone joked quietly about coffee running low again. Olivia returned to her desk. She didn't sit immediately. She stood there for a moment, watching the flow of the room. No one was preparing for anything unusual. That was the part that bothered her most. Not disagreement. Complacency. She reopened her analysis file, refined the timeline again, adjusted weighting on signal disruptions, ran the model forward. The output didn't change. If anything, it became more precise. A convergence window forming in under 72 hours. She leaned closer to the screen, then paused. A new data update had just come in. Partial satellite drift anomalies along one of the eastern relay zones. Small, subtle, but it matched her predicted pre-phase shift. Her fingers tightened slightly on the edge of the desk. That shouldn't have appeared this early. Olivia stood and moved quickly toward the secondary comms desk. Can you pull the latest satellite pass data for Eastern Relay Sector? She asked the technician. He glanced up. Is this for the ongoing review? Yes. He typed a few commands. A moment later, the feed updated. Olivia watched silently. The anomaly wasn't random. It was synchronized, just like the others. Her prediction window was collapsing forward. She returned to her station, more alert now, opened a direct request form for operational escalation, filled it out, then stopped. Her eyes lingered on the final submission field. Escalation without confirmation would be rejected again. She already knew that. But waiting meant accepting delay as acceptable risk. She closed the form without sending it. Not out of hesitation, out of calculation. Across the room, another analyst called out, "Sector 2 surveillance back to baseline. Looks like a false spike." A few people relaxed again. Olivia didn't, because the pattern didn't show reversal. It showed stabilization before transition. She stood slowly, walked back to the wall map, placed her hand near the Eastern Corridor cluster, and traced the timing sequence once more. This time, there was no doubt in her process, only in how long it would take others to see it. As evening approached, the unit began rotating shifts. Olivia remained at her desk while others started packing up or switching monitors to night tracking modes. The facility's lighting shifted slightly, cooler tones, lower intensity. The atmosphere felt quieter, but not safer. Olivia saved her latest model update and added one final line to her internal assessment. Final phase alignment likely imminent upon next signal compression cycle. She stared at it for a moment, then closed the file, not because she was finished, but because there was nothing else she could prove in advance. Everything now depended on whether anyone would act before the pattern finished unfolding. And for the first time since she arrived, Olivia stopped trying to convince the room. She simply watched it, waiting for the moment when the data would stop being theory and become reality. It started without announcement. There was no sudden alarm across the entire facility, no dramatic shift in posture that signaled something had officially begun. At first, it looked like routine anomalies, small spikes in activity reports, a few delayed status updates, minor communication lag between sectors. Olivia noticed it before anyone called it what it was. She was already at her station when the first cluster of alerts appeared on her screen. 3 separate logistics hubs flagged within the same 7-minute window. Her hand stopped moving. Then she reached for her headset. "Can someone confirm status on Northern Logistics Hub 3? She asked calmly. A pause, then a reply from across the room. "Checking." 10 seconds passed, then 20. That delay mattered more than the question. The main operations screen shifted. More alerts began stacking, one after another, faster now. Communication degradation markers appeared along eastern relay lines. Satellite feeds began refreshing irregularly, not fully dropping, but failing to stabilize. A technician muttered, "That's not normal interference." Another leaned forward. "It's coordinated." Olivia didn't move from her chair. Her eyes tracked the pattern forming in real time. The structure she had mapped, days of subtle timing, spacing, alignment, was no longer theoretical. It was unfolding, exactly as predicted. Within minutes, the first confirmed strike reports came in. A logistics depot in the Northern Corridor went offline, initially reported as a communications failure. Then a second update corrected it. Multiple simultaneous disruptions, including internal system blackout and perimeter sensor loss. A third update followed almost immediately. Contact had been lost with security teams inside the perimeter. The room shifted, not into panic, but into acceleration. People stopped talking in full sentences. Radios came alive. Screens changed states faster. Chairs were pushed back. Someone said, "We're getting multiple hits across separate nodes." Another voice, "Eastern relay is down. Repeat, relay is down." Olivia stood up. Her chair rolled slightly behind her. She walked directly to the central operations board. No hesitation now. The map was filling with red markers, clusters expanding across the exact zones she had identified in her model. She pointed once. "Phase 1 is complete," she said. A nearby officer looked at her. "What?" Olivia didn't look away from the map. "Initial disruption phase. Logistics and comms degradation. It's done." The officer frowned. "You're saying this is staged?" "It is staged," she corrected quietly. "And we're moving into phase 2. As if on cue, the next wave began. It wasn't louder. It was wider. Communication gaps spread outward from the initial impact zones. Instead of isolated failures, entire segments of network routing began failing in sequence, not all at once, just enough to confuse response coordination. A senior coordinator raised his voice for the first time. "Patch through alternate relay channels." A technician responded. "Secondary channels are also unstable, routing loops forming." Olivia's gaze sharpened. "They're forcing reroute congestion," she said. No one asked her to explain this time. They were already seeing it. The unit shifted into full response mode. Command priorities were reassigned. Rapid assessments were requested from multiple divisions. Field units were contacted for verification. But verification was slow. Too slow. Because the structure Olivia had identified wasn't just an attack pattern. It was a timing trap. Each disruption created delay in confirmation systems, which delayed response, which allowed the next disruption to land before recovery stabilized. She turned slightly toward the operations coordinator. "They're not trying to destroy everything at once," she said. "They're compressing response time until decisions lag behind events." The coordinator didn't answer immediately. His attention was split between multiple screens, but he nodded once. "Keep tracking," he said. It wasn't an order, but it was the first time her role shifted inside the room. A new alert flashed red across the central board. "Secondary target zone engaged." Olivia's eyes narrowed slightly. "That's the third node cluster," she said. One of the analysts turned toward her. "How did you know that was next?" She didn't answer directly. "It follows the sequence interval." A pause. Then the analyst looked back at the screen, expression changing slightly. He understood. Not fully, but enough. Field reports began trickling in again, fragmented, unstable, often incomplete. One unit reported forced evacuation from a compromised relay station. Another lost internal surveillance feed mid-transmission. A third never completed its status update at all. Each report aligned with the structure Olivia had already mapped days earlier, but now it was faster, less forgiving, compressed into real execution. She began marking phases manually on the board, not because she needed to, but because the room needed to see it. Phase 1 was already complete. Phase 2 was unfolding, and Phase 3 was still ahead. A junior officer approached her slightly from the side. "You said this would happen," he said quietly. Olivia didn't look at him immediately. "I said it was structured," she replied. "That's not the same thing," he said. Now she turned slightly. "It became the same thing when no one stopped the first phase." He didn't respond after that. He just stepped back. The operations room grew louder now, but in controlled bursts. Short commands, confirmations, status checks. No chaos, but pressure building under discipline. Olivia stayed focused on timing intervals. Something still wasn't complete. The pattern had one more layer. She checked the remaining signal clusters, then paused. "Wait," she said softly. A technician looked up. "What?" She leaned closer to the map. "They're adjusting tempo." That changed everything. Before, the operation had followed a stable timing structure, predictable intervals between disruptions. But now, the gaps were tightening, not random acceleration. Adaptive response. She pointed at the Eastern Corridor cluster. "They've detected our pattern recognition," she said. A senior analyst frowned. "That's not possible at this stage." Olivia didn't argue. She just showed him the shift in intervals. The silence that followed was different from earlier briefings. This one carried weight. Then came the worst update so far. A logistics hub, one of the primary nodes she had flagged in her earliest model, was reporting full operational blackout. Backup systems failed to initialize. And worse, evacuation confirmation was delayed due to communication collapse. The coordinator reacted immediately. "Send field support units, reroute through secondary access." A technician shook his head. "Secondary routes are compromised." That sentence changed the room's energy, because it meant containment was no longer clean. It was reactive, and reaction was already behind. Olivia stepped forward again. Her voice was steady, but sharper now. There's a secondary phase still unaccounted for, she said. The coordinator looked at her. We're in it, he replied. No, Olivia said quietly. This is still Phase 2 expansion. She turned toward the map. If Phase 3 begins before we stabilize comms, we'll lose coordination entirely between sectors. Someone behind her muttered, Then what's Phase 3? Olivia didn't answer immediately, because she was still confirming it. Then she said it. The final compression strike, targeting response coordination itself. A pause. That one landed differently, because it didn't mean destruction of assets. It meant destruction of control. Another alert sounded. Then another. The system began struggling to maintain synchronized updates across sectors. For the first time, even Olivia's model struggled to keep pace. Not because it was wrong, but because the input data was collapsing in real time. She exhaled slowly. This is the transition window, she said. The coordinator looked at her. Can we still contain it? Olivia didn't give a comforting answer. We can still reduce impact, she said, but only if response stays synchronized. A beat. Then she added, quieter. And we're running out of time for that. Around them, the room fully shifted into crisis coordination. But Olivia stayed anchored to the structure behind it. The pattern had stopped being invisible. Now it was active. And the only thing left to determine was how much damage would occur before the final phase completed its cycle. The first sign that something had ended was not a celebration or a message of success. It was silence. Not complete silence. Systems never fully stopped in a facility like this, but the kind of silence that arrives after hours of constant pressure. The alarms reduced in frequency. The overlapping radio channels began to stabilize. Screens stopped refreshing in chaotic bursts and returned to slower, controlled updates. Olivia noticed it before anyone said it. Her eyes were still on the central map. The red markers were no longer expanding. They were holding. Then slowly, they began to shrink into status indicators instead of active alerts. She didn't relax. Not immediately. The operations coordinator spoke first. Confirm sector status reports as they come in, he ordered, voice lower now, almost controlled exhaustion rather than urgency. A technician nodded. Eastern relay chain is partially restored. Northern logistics, still degraded but stable. Another voice added. Field units reporting partial recovery of communication links. The room wasn't relieved yet. It was recalculating reality. Olivia remained standing near the central display. Her hands were still. Her focus wasn't on what had just happened. It was on what had nearly continued. Reports continued to arrive over the next hour. The picture formed slowly. 3 major logistics hubs had been disrupted. 2 communication relay sectors had suffered cascading failures. Multiple field units had been forced into emergency fallback protocols. But the critical detail came in gradually, as fragments were verified and stitched together. The operation had not achieved full systemic collapse. It had stopped short of the final coordination phase. Olivia read the updated sequencing report once, then again. Her prediction model had been correct in structure, but the last phase, compression into full response disintegration, had been partially interrupted by adaptive countermeasures deployed mid-event. She exhaled slowly. That mattered. A lot. By midday, the command center had transitioned into recovery operations. The atmosphere had changed again. Not back to normal, but into something more reflective. People spoke in quieter tones. Movements were slower. No one was celebrating. Not yet. Olivia sat down for the first time in hours. Her notebook was open beside her keyboard. She began writing again. Not analysis this time, but sequence reconstruction. A junior analyst approached her desk hesitantly. "You were right," he said. Olivia didn't look up immediately. "I was early," she corrected. He frowned slightly. "That's the same thing." "It's not," she said calmly. "Being right after confirmation is reporting. Being right before it is ignored is just data." He didn't respond to that. He just stood there for a moment. then walked away. Later, she was called into the formal debrief. This time, the room was different. Same walls, same display system. But the posture of the people inside had shifted. Fewer assumptions, less casual dismissal, more careful attention. The senior coordinator gestured for her to sit near the front. It was the first time she had been placed there. Olivia sat without comment. A long pause followed as the operational summary was displayed. Then the coordinator spoke. Your analytical model identified the structure of the operation before execution began. A pause. We want a full reconstruction of your assessment timeline. Olivia nodded once. I can provide it. But she didn't sound satisfied. Not because she was wrong, because correctness had arrived late enough that it still carried cost. The debrief continued. Details were reviewed. Timelines, response delays, misinterpretations of early indicators. Each phase she had identified was now clearly mapped against real-world impact. When the final sequence summary appeared on the screen, the room went quiet for a moment. Not because it was shocking, but because it was precise. Too precise to ignore now. One of the senior officers finally spoke. Why wasn't this escalated earlier with higher confidence? The question wasn't accusatory. It was uncomfortable. Olivia answered evenly. Because pattern-based prediction without field confirmation is often treated as speculation. That response lingered. No one immediately contradicted it. After the formal session ended, people began to leave in small groups. Olivia stayed behind for a moment longer. The room was mostly empty now, except for a few staff members updating final logs. The coordinator approached her quietly. You handled this well under conditions that weren't in your favor, he said. Olivia looked at him. I didn't handle it, she replied. I just tracked it. A pause, then she added, the structure was already there. He nodded slowly. I know. That was all he said. Outside the briefing room, the facility had returned to operational recovery rhythm. Damage control teams were still active. Communication nodes were still being repaired. Field units were rotating back into secure positions. But the immediate crisis had passed. Olivia walked through the corridor alone for a while. No one stopped her now. That was the change she noticed most. Not recognition. Access. Back at her workstation, she opened a fresh file. She titled it, Post-Event Pattern Deviation Analysis, then paused before continuing. Because something had changed in her thinking. The system hadn't failed due to lack of information. It had failed due to delayed interpretation of structured information. She began typing again. Not about what happened, but about what was missed. Hours later, as the facility dimmed into night cycle again, Olivia remained at her desk. The room around her was quieter than it had been since her arrival. No one ignored her anymore, but no one fully spoke to her either. That middle space, between invisibility and integration, felt different. Not uncomfortable, just unfamiliar. As she saved her final notes for the day, Olivia glanced at the recovered operational map one last time. The red markers were gone now. Only faint indicators remained, marking where coordination had been broken and restored. She studied it briefly, then closed the file. Not because the story was over, but because she understood something now that she hadn't on her first day. In intelligence work, being correct wasn't the moment everything changed. It was the moment people finally had to understand what had already been true. And that's where Olivia's story reaches its end. For now. What began as a quiet arrival of an overlooked analyst became a lesson the entire unit would not forget. In the end, it wasn't rank, experience, or noise that saved lives. It was attention to patterns others chose to ignore. Olivia didn't ask for recognition. She didn't need it. She simply did her job, stayed consistent, and trusted what the data was telling her long before anyone else was willing to listen. Now, as the system recovers and the operation is fully understood, Her findings will remain part of the record and part of how future decisions are made. Thank you for staying with this story until the end. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. More powerful military stories are coming soon. See you in the next story.